Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. Welcome to another episode of Context. Today on the program, we turn our focus to Washington, where Azerbaijan and Armenia are set to take a historic step toward peace. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has confirmed that the two nations will sign a key agreement marking the beginning of a long-awaited peace deal. This follows last month's meeting in Abu Dhabi between Azerbaijan's president and Armenia's prime minister, where they discussed efforts to normalize relations and agreed to continue negotiations and confidence-building measures. We'll explore what this means for the peace process, the role of the US and the broader regional implications, and what the road ahead might look like. So the stakes are high for the South Caucasus, but will this be the moment that turns decades of tension into lasting peace remains to be seen. Let's bring in our guests to unpack what's really at play. Joining me are Klaus Jurgens, a political analyst with Economy First Limited from London, UK, and Associate Professor Orkan Valiev, Head of Department at Khazar University from Baku, Azerbaijan. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hello.
Now, Klaus, how significant is it that Washington and not Brussels, Moscow or Ankara is the venue for this first peace agreement step?
Dilek, I think I remember when we had the election night, and I said, look, Donald Trump wants to make America great again. And everyone said, is he only looking at domestic issues? And I said already on the night, give him 100 days, or 200 days, or even 1 year, and he will not actually engage in splendid isolation, but try to establish his way of America on a global scale. 99% not with boots on the ground, but rather a regional actor trying to help to establish peace whenever it is required. So not necessarily the policeman of the world, but a kind of regional peace-making actor, if that is at all possible. This sounds very optimistic, I know. Now, but if Donald Trump and his team now realized realpolitik, the famous German word, is actually the order of the day, the Southern Caucasus is so important for America to show two things. First of all, can Washington help to actually erase regional conflicts, which might become a tinderbox, not only for one or two countries, but an entire region and perhaps spilling over into other parts of the world? Mm-hmm. And what would be the benefits for Washington, besides being a peace broker? There are two things. I go back to, I think we have time to come back to Section 907, I'm sure we will, 1992, when the Armenian lobby somehow managed to pressurize Washington into you can't actually give aid to Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. Now, if we link a peace deal, if we link the Zangazour corridor, if we link the suspension of Section 907, we have quite a lot on Donald Trump's plate. Last point, very briefly, mm-hmm. Why not Brussels, why not Berlin, why not Paris? It underlines that the soul searching in Brussels and in many European capitals is continuing, whilst Donald Trump, like him, hate him, don't like him, appreciate him, it's none of my business, in general talking to the public now. He is actually doing things. He is setting trends. And if he manages this peace deal, he might look into other directions and other parts of the world as well. How can Washington help? As I said, optimistic this time, yes.
Okay, Orkan, from an Azerbaijani perspective, what does signing such an agreement in Washington mean in terms of international legitimacy and image?
Yes, let me start with the first question. That it seems that Donald Trump, first of all, just wants peace, mm-hmm. and to want to contribute. That's why we are discussing the Washington the meeting. Sure. So, Azerbaijani perspective, before the first meeting, the bilateral meeting between the two leaders in Abu Dhabi, the first the turning point in terms of towards that peace agreement between two nations. But however, it was a local issue in terms of the regional issue between the countries, but however needed, as you mentioned, the international recognition in legal status of the peace negotiation process. So in this respect, the signing a respective agreement after the meeting in Washington will bring it the international legality. The peace agreement, and it will be decisive and pivotal step to the final agreement between the final peace agreement between two nations. That's why, yes, it can be said that the meeting has already, the influence impacts on towards the peace agreement to a nation.
And Klaus, is this genuinely the beginning of a durable peace process, or just another symbolic moment without long-term guarantees? I mean, could this be a breakthrough this time?
I really hope so. As you know, I'm a very happy visitor to your fine nation on a number of occasions recently, and looking forward to coming back hopefully soon. Now, yes, peace is actually not only what your nation needs, peace is what Armenia deserves as well. We should not fall into the trap of the money-wise, well-oiled Armenian lobby in Washington, in Berlin, in Brussels, in Paris in particular. That's the Armenian lobby. They always acted against basically reconciliation, because then their raison d'etre would no longer be there. The second, your nation and Armenia really have peace amongst the two nations, and by thus the wider region. The Armenian lobby is basically having made itself obsolete, and I think that would be a very good development. Now, playing to the gallery, I would dare to say the following. From a Washington perspective, if I would for 1 second put, of course I can't, but put my commentator's shoes into an American colleague's shoes. Now, this about Armenian and Azerbaijani peace, it is about the wider region, but we should not forget that Washington wants to be a global player again. And we have Russia, we have Iran, and we have China. And all of them have something to say about how could this peace deal actually evolve, what is in it for us, what is not. And this peace deal, if we leave Iran and China aside for 1 minute, if we leave those two countries aside, Russia, of course, might still be worried, because then the influence in the entire region would more or less be reduced to Georgia. And Moscow, so much obsessed with Ukraine, and there is a void. And why not bring a regional peace and stability dimension into this void? Famously, the former German chancellor once said, there will never be a world without Russia. Yes, but maybe even one day Russia will wake up and say, okay, we have to do some more realpolitik as well. So I don't think it is only symbolic, but please let us not forget that Washington for sure is eyeing the Iranian, Chinese, and definitely Russian cards as well.
Okay, and I definitely want to come back to those cards, but for now we'll keep going with the consecutive order that I have. Orkan, how does Baku balance this Washington track with its existing relationships with Moscow, Ankara and Beijing, as Klaus also mentioned?
I don't know, Azerbaijan is a consistent country in terms of the foreign policy, the balance, the principles of principles of the balance and neutrality and multilateralism that are the main elements of the foreign policy of Azerbaijan since the former President Haydar Aliyev, and continued during the current President Ilham Aliyev. That's why I don't think that it would be the decisive problem because Azerbaijan doesn't have any, as mentioned repeatedly over the last 5 years, that just looking for the contribution to the peace agreement between two nations. Because not just Azerbaijan, the entire region needs the peace agreement. That's why, and in this context, it seems that yes, only Washington can contribute to the peace process. First of all. In terms of international status, first of all, Washington has concrete plan that wants peace, won't contribute to the peace, the process in the South Caucasus, and also has potential to contribute to the peace process between two nations. So that's why I don't think that. And also, the Moscow has been dealing with its internal issue in terms of Ukraine and so on. So that's why it seems that yes, the Washington is much more closer to contribute to the peace process to the nation, to the peace process. That's why I don't think that yes, it will be any the decisive problem between Baku and Moscow in terms of this process.
Okay. And Klaus, you did touch upon this earlier in the piece. What does Washington's involvement signal about the West's strategic priorities in the South Caucasus and the US in particular, obviously?
Well, we are Germans. Sometimes we go back into history. I remember over 2 decades ago having relocated and moved to Turkey. And one of the first invitations to give a lecture actually was about the Caucasus and the South Caucasus. And this was on a German initiative. Very interesting, I said. Wow, how will this play out? What can be the outcome? And at that time, Germany was very, very interested in the Southern Caucasus. Over the decades, somehow, I think they lost a little bit of focus. The EU enlarged. The EU wanted to enlarge further, of course, forgetting about Turkey, unfortunately, but enlarging anywhere else. Now, Brussels never really replaced a logic and sound strategy. So for some time, with all due modesty, I think your nation, Azerbaijan and Armenia, were left to their own devices because the international community, same with many issues affecting a neighboring Republic of Turkey, simply said, let them sort it out by themselves. And then, of course, constantly, this Azerbaijan bashing, Armenia is in the right and Azerbaijan, whatever it does, must be wrong. Now, fast forward, who could ever remedy this? As I've mentioned, it can't be one EU member state. It can't probably not even be a soul-searching European Union. The only place in the world is indeed Washington. And the only place who could actually say, look, perhaps in the mistake, previous governments made a mistake, and Section 907 is one of them, 1992, if I may reiterate. Now, if Washington actually says, look, there will be a peace agreement, there will be the Zangazour corridor, and the wider region will benefit. Of course, America then wants to see what is actually in it for us in the long run. But yes, as my dear esteemed colleague professor here just said, Washington is the place. It's no longer whom do we call in Europe from the side of Washington. By now it is actually whom in the world do we call from the side of Brussels. And it seems that with Armenia and Azerbaijan and the wider region, it is Washington. Only one word of caution, let us not forget, if Trump is really embarking onto realpolitik, he might have a few other countries with whom he wants to recalibrate relations to actually safeguard that peace. But yes, for the time being, it looks very good. And yes, Washington is the right address.
Okay. And Orkan, in terms of substance, what do you expect this beginning of a peace deal to actually contain? Confidence building measures, border demarcations, what are we to expect?
Yes, it's clear that Azerbaijan has some certain and concrete the legal requirements in terms of the peace process, including the demarcation border issue and also the amendments on the Armenian constitution and so on. So, but I think Azerbaijan has a pretty clear strategy regarding the peace process. First of all, the minimization of any kind of threats to its territorial integrity, independence, and any national interests, and also achievement of the permanent peace in the region, which will be decisive for the future of the region, specifically in terms of the uncertain the character of the global politics, which is quite enough important for the young nations of the region. So the establishment of the sustainable environment for the cooperation and Zangazour corridor and the implementation of Zangazour corridor will be part of the cooperation, and it will bring the benefit for the three nations of the region, and including 3+3, and implementation of the global project, the more global project, and also elimination of the historical injustice toward Azerbaijan that coming from the early 1990s and so on. So this is, I think, the Azerbaijani perspective, maybe wrote in terms of the peace process that has been mentioned over the last 5 years.
Okay. Klaus, how might this process reshape the balance of influence between the US, Russia and the EU in the region?
Well, that's a good point, Dilek. Now I need my crystal ball. I think, first of all, Brussels will one more time realize, sadly so for Brussels, and I know many people there, as you know, they will one more time realize, where are we standing on this global world order? Where is our influence? What does EU foreign policy actually entail? How can we have tangible benefits for the EU and our partners? Believe me, this soul searching will continue. Secondly, Russia has only two options: continue the Ukraine situation endlessly, or finally, even there, come to a peace agreement. Now, Vladimir Putin recently said there are areas for negotiation as long as Ukraine is ceding 4 territories. You mentioned territorial integrity. Would President Zelensky go so far? Not immediately, of course not. But if further bloodshed is the only sad and shocking option, perhaps even Washington can step in there instead of only playing to the gallery, simply say, now there is a deadline and you two guys actually have to do something together. In this regard, I'm not that optimistic. It will happen overnight, but let us start with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, there is another dimension, of course. When peace comes to the region, the entire perception of the region and the entire perception of Azerbaijan in particular is going to change, because it is not only about regional peace and stability. Can you imagine there would be, I mentioned this once before, not a photocopy of the EU's internal market, but a regional kind of internal market, free travel, energy, economy, education, tourism. You know, once peace is there, the entire region might benefit. And then, of course, we add the Zangazour corridor and we add Nakhchivan. And I think it is huge, huge potential. Don't get me wrong, an American advisor to a Democrat candidate once said, it is the economy, stupid. But is it not correct to say, once prosperity comes to the region, higher prosperity, higher levels of income, better economic cooperation between 2 or 3 or even more countries, the actual individual citizens' welfare will improve as well, and more investment will come, more schools will be built, more roads, more houses, more hospitals, and everywhere in the region. And I've just come back from Karabakh, as you know. It is amazing the level of infrastructure investment. Now imagine this would spill over into Armenia and many, many other regions and parts of that region. So yes, let's come peace first, but don't forget the economy might be the long-term peace maker.
Okay. And Orkan, you mentioned earlier one of the major expectancies as part of the peace process and what it would actually contain. You mentioned the Zangazour corridor. Could this deal accelerate plans for regional infrastructure projects alongside the Zangazour corridor, for example?
Yep. The Zangazour corridor, implementation of the Zangazour corridor, that will enhance the economic cooperation between among the regional countries, and also will involve the global actors. For example, the U.S. And the President Trump has some of the concrete the offer. We don't know will it be implemented or not, but they have some certain the offer. So the Zangazour corridor is just the economic, the part of the process that has been mentioned right after the Second Karabakh War, the Vice President Aliyev and also by President Erdogan, that they tried to offer that involved the 3+3, that they guaranteed that it will bring the benefit for all the partners of the process. So that's why I think it's quite important, and also will have some different, how to say, the historical importance, and also implementation of Zangazour corridor maybe will be how to say decisive point, elimination of the, let's say, imperial traces in the region, in terms of the former, let's say, agreements in terms of 19th century that President Aliyev mentioned at the opening ceremony of Karabakh University, for example. So will be quite enough the important step, I think, that and needs to be part of the process.
And Klaus, in your view, what are the biggest risks that could derail the momentum after the signing?
Well, I don't want to play devil's advocate, this time not a German but an English infamous saying, but there are, of course, still risks. And we have to be honest, the deal is only part of the process. It will not be the end result. And let me mention just one thing. 2 years ago in Shusha, Zain Hajiev mentioned that with regards to landmines, Armenia unfortunately did not provide the correct maps. So how on earth can we actually demine those terrible landmines? So there are still a number of issues which, once the peace deal has been brokered out, both sides actually must openly talk about. Landmines are one of them. And I will attend a meeting very shortly about the right to return. Yes, the Western Azerbaijani community. Now, of course, we have two options. We put now all the contentious issues far away as if they don't exist. Or we actually, because now a moment of understanding and solidarity between your both nations, Armenia and Azerbaijan, will be reached very shortly, actually say, look, what else needs to be done? How can this peace deal become permanent? Are there any mistakes which were made in the past, and how can they be remedied? Some of them can't, of course, but looking ahead. So yes, it is for me, it is not the end result, what happens now in Washington, but it is the beginning towards the end result.
Okay, and Okan, looking ahead, what role might Azerbaijan envision for itself in ensuring that the peace deal is sustainable?
Well, first of all, the overall the evaluation, the peace needed just first of all local regional power that which is Azerbaijan in terms of the President Aliyev, and also the international is a global actor in terms of the United States and the President Trump. So which is the quite enough important. And I think, yeah, the potential risks of the peace time, I think, has been already eliminated. So I don't think that there will be any kind of the threat to the peace time in the region, because they have we have the witness the 5 years the process that has been done between the leaders, including bilateral meetings and also with different partners. The meetings, for example, the Nikol Pashinyan visited Ankara and so on. So I think yes. In the region, the South Caucasus needs to be deserved to this process in the coming as soon as.
Okay. And Klaus, what leverage does Washington have over both Baku and Yerevan to ensure commitments are actually honoured here?
Well, yes, I hope actually, as I've said in the past, everyone was unfairly challenging Baku. And now Washington apparently has woken up and said, look, this can't continue. Yes, of course, there will be a certain leverage. May I come back for a last time, Section 907? If now it becomes clear that Washington can actually proactively work with Baku, and what my colleague just said, if Baku becomes an even more important player in the region, I think Washington would have found a very, very good partner, which would, coming back to my initial point, make America great again. If that entails realpolitik and peace building instead of warmongering, Washington, please be my guest. Leverage, you said. Leverage is a give and take. Washington can't just demand, you have to do this, you have to do that, and like patting on the shoulder, we are the big brother. No, Washington has to give something in return as well. And I think the crucial point would be investments into the region, technology transfer, and closer cooperation in many fields. Yes. So leverage, a give and take, I hope.
Okay. Orkan, how might domestic political considerations in Armenia and Azerbaijan affect how leaders frame this agreement back home?
I think, yes, specifically in terms of Azerbaijan, the society has been awaiting the peace, actually, because Azerbaijan politically, militarily dissolved, actually, the process. And also they, met through the bilateral meeting in Abu Dhabi, discussed many issues between the President Aliyev and Nikol Pashinyan. And also we did it through the 5 years. So, for example, in terms of the Lachen corridor, in terms of the liberation of any kind of the parts of the Karabakh and so on. So I think yes, specifically in terms of Azerbaijan, and both the societies are ready for the peace. But of course, maybe in terms of Armenians, they have some the radical nationalist groups. Could have some the problems, but as I mentioned before, I don't think that the peacetime will have some the deepest the threats to the process from the societies.
Okay, Klaus, is there a risk that bringing the US in so visibly could make Moscow or Tehran more likely to disrupt this process?
As I mentioned, I think Moscow is preoccupied with situations elsewhere. What is a little bit worrying is perhaps plans from the side of the Iranian government actually to head to Armenia shortly. Now, of course, they are worried what will happen to our influence. Again, leverage. I still think sanctions never work, and sanctions only negatively impact the ordinary citizen. So if now Washington would say, Tehran, you have to stay calm, you can't get involved, if not we impose further sanctions or looking into sanctions towards Russia, there were always ways around sanctions. Russia, of course, wants to have the corridor to bypass EU sanctions. So they are very interested into the region. How can they use the local territory and to get imports and exports without having to go via EU territory? I know. But who always is negatively impacted by sanctions? The ordinary citizen. And this would actually create an anti-Americanism. And if Donald Trump understands this, that you mentioned wonderful word, the leverage. If he understands, look, we have to give something as well. We can't just control the world anymore. We have to talk eye to eye. And who is in our interest? The ordinary citizen in Moscow or in Tehran or anywhere else. I think the image of the United States would radically and drastically improve. And maybe this is a nice side effect of this entire peace deal, that there's something in it for Washington as well. Hey, we did it. This is a good step. No more war. But as my colleague said, 5 years in the making, now peace. What do we do next? Even closer cooperation. I think Donald Trump can actually add to his legacy in the positive sense if he monitors the ongoing peace process, at the same time makes sure that there is no outside undue interference. But as I've said, military intervention, of course, never. At the same time, sanctions against ordinary people, no. There must be an alternative. They all have studied international relations or went into business. And Donald Trump would know that how to strike a deal. His famous book, The Art of the Deal. Maybe now he has learned how to make the art of a peacemaker deal. I would be very, very happy about this.
Okay. And Orkan, lastly, looking ahead, what role might Azerbaijan envision for itself in ensuring that the peace deal is in fact sustainable?
Actually, Azerbaijan's road has started with the 5 principles of the foreign minister that has been released in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So it has been mentioned that what Azerbaijan wants and what Azerbaijan wrote. And also I mentioned that Azerbaijan, first of all, just simply wants the minimization of any threats to its territorial integrity, the sovereignty, and also national interests, and also the open door for the cooperation, because Azerbaijan estimated that yes, the region needs the cooperation in terms of the regional cooperation and also implementation of through the implementation of the global project. So that's why I think Azerbaijan's the road is pretty clear, and that's why they brought 2 countries to Washington.
Okay, Orkan and Klaus, thank you so much for joining us on Context today.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure.
Now, Washington may well be hosting more than just a signing. It could be the opening chapter of a new era in the South Caucasus. Whether this moment delivers a lasting peace or simply a pause will depend on the political will on both sides and the realities on the ground. So that's all for today's episode of Context. Until next time, thanks for watching.